Thank you so much to Megan Mize and Elle Tyson for being with us from Old Dominion University. We're excited to hear about centering student voice in an AI-mediated world, ePortfolios as a site of agency. And just as an aside, Megan, thank you so much for making the trip to Indianapolis last week to be our keynote. It was wonderful to have you with us.
Well, thank you guys again for inviting me last week. I so enjoyed our in-person session. You all, I have to tell you, I felt terrible. I ended up leaving Port Pablo at the airport when our flights went sideways. So I did warn him, anytime you travel with me, it gets a little funky. And I actually got home. Okay, so I'm going to, so sorry, go into present mode and make sure I can see you all. Anyway, all right. Hello, everyone. Debbie, thank you for that very kind introduction. I'm going to keep the chat off to the side, so I'll do my best to keep my eyes on it. And I've so appreciated the conversations up to this point. I really think it's really exciting when you see intersections in our conversations and seeing the community move in the same way. And obviously, I think AI is going to be an increasing part of our discussion, not because I'm someone who embraces it uncritically, but because I come at it in Elle as well through the lens of writing studies as a new writing technology that must be contended with. And so we've dropped in the chat a link to this slide deck, and certainly we will happily share any materials since people are sharing. And as Debbie said, my name is Megan Mize. I am the director for ePortfolios and digital initiatives here at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia. I believe Corey earlier was flexing on us with her perfect weather, and we are bracing for storms again. And here to you, my work is really overseeing any portfolio support, but I really work closely with faculty and administrators to design and integrate ePortfolio interventions in courses, programs, initiatives, you name it. And right now we're really working on an exciting project with an entirely new gen ed. And Elle, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Elle Tyson. I'm the Assistant Director for ePortfolios and Digital Initiatives. And I focus on the student support side of things and obviously coordinate daily. I'm lucky to be able to do that with Megan every day to make sure that our student support is aligned with our faculty support and we have a good iterative process for making sure that those are always aligned.
Exactly. So anything we do with faculty, we pair with student support because we think it's really important and we really value everybody talking about these really student-centered approaches to portfolio practice. So I'm really grateful to hear that kind of language here. And when we talk about ePortfolios, any of you who have heard me before or saw the keynote last week, or our writing studies folks, our portfolio scholars, know just how important we think the process is in portfolio practice. So many times, portfolios are inadvertently or implicitly categorized as products, but it's really about the process within which the student gets to that product because we are developing habitudes, ways of thinking, ways of curating, archiving, designing, etc. And so really making visible to the student too the process of learning in an era where everything really kind of commodifies learning as a diploma or a degree at the end. In this means you're an educated individual, but really the person who can analyze the what, how, and why of where they got to where they are tends to be the more agile individual in the future. So the question we really kind of posed ourselves with this particular presentation is if AI can generate text and image and video on demand and convincingly so, then perhaps portfolios can become this ideal space to shift attention back towards process and accountability. And last week, I started to engage with a colleague, Jason Tam's framework for slow pedagogies. Can portfolios slow down our students and encourage them to go through the slow process of developing, yes, Gail, I said habitude because we're English scholars, so we're very informed by NCTE's habitudes of mind. Can't get away from your discipline no matter how hard you try. All right, so and of course you're the choir, but just because I know every institution and all scholarship, when we talk about genres, those are slippery things, and people use different terminologies to reference different types of portfolios. So I hear people talk about process portfolios or learning portfolios as synonymous, or we see demonstration or showcase portfolios, or even sometimes personal professional portfolios. And those can all have kinds of different connotations, but we're going to use learning portfolio, meaning kind of the process driven, iterative, sometimes messy, imperfect place where students really are invited to reflect and revise over time and explore their decision making versus that more showcase portfolio that comes after those habits are built and those digital literacies and rhetorical skills are developed in the learning portfolio, which are a little more polished and intentional for external audiences, such as grad schools or industry professionals, things like that. And Elle, I can't see you, so if I override your slide, but I think I know where we're going to switch. So I think I'm all prepped. So just put it in the chat, and I'll switch to you. But we're talking about voice and agency, and part of agency is being accountable because you're the person making choices, and voice is a choice, right? The register and tone that you strike in your portfolio is all rhetorical choice. And so we're going to look at an example in a one-page portfolio. And again, at ODU, we just have a wide swath of portfolios and genres because when you have writing scholars helming your portfolio program, we're annoying in that we really avoid monolithic genres and assignment design. But we're going to ask you, and I'm going to give you the example in a second, to look at what choices and trade-offs is the student making? Where are they explaining those decisions? Looking at evidence-based reflection, which I think is really part of why portfolios, to our keynote speaker earlier, talking about the resilience of portfolio practice. We're seeing again in industry this drive back towards portfolios because it's evidence-based, because students can show they have that experience. So where do we see concrete evidence of the students' claims about their own learning? And then where do we see specificity and context, which often is, again, voice. It's somewhat defiant of AI, which really often stays at the level of the ambiguous and the broad because it's drawing on, again, large language models. So it will always be replicating rather than creating. And I'll climb off my soapbox. Yes, thank you, Elle. So we are going to show you Leila Hernandez in Alumni Now at ODU. And as always, whenever we show a portfolio, we ask that you be kind and you are that community. And we're not showing it to you because we think it's perfect, but we think that Layla is an interesting example of a student doing some of this work, that her voice comes through. And I'm just inviting you, as I go back to these questions, to tell me, where do you see her voice emerging? And where do you see her taking accountability for her own experiences, her own learning process? And so I'll give you a few minutes and do the hardest thing for a Gemini, which is to stop talking. Okay, that was hard for me. So now I would love to ask you all for one or two comments. When you looked at Layla's portfolio and you're thinking about her voice, where do you see that coming through? How do we know she's not a bot?
Well, I love her use of pictures
Absolutely.
to illustrate, the connection with she's saying she learned. Um, and that also clearly just shows her personality through those pictures too.
Absolutely. She's very humanized in this, right? I have shown this to many employers. I've had 100% rate say they would interview her. One of my favorite things is one told us he would go no further than this to know she is a trusted person because of how costly this technology is. Although it has been commented that she needs to move this drink away from it, right? Um, Someone else mentioned to me she seems to be able to work in a group. We can see this is Layla with people who seem happy to be around her. We see this again. And so group work is a NACE competency. So Layla is showing you not with words, but with image, she's establishing a voice that is playful and collaborative. Um, so her multimodal content is amplifying the text. Um, Debbie, you said the skills accrue over time. Where do you see her pointing towards evidence of accrual?
She specifically says, now that I gain skills as a lighting tech.
Mm-hmm.
And then she says what happens next. Um, I'm not sure I can read it on your screen,
Oh,
but
I'm sorry, you don't have, I could stop sharing.
no, it's where it's under UDT dance clip. What's next for you professionally?
There it
Uh,
is. Yeah.
and then I love that she's like, the internship helped me realize there's a wide opportunity for behind the scenes roles found in all production types. I mean, that's not AI language.
Yeah.
Um,
She uses a lot of emotional language, a lot of affect, which I think it goes back to this being a learning portfolio, but she was really surprised. I love earlier, she says, I was not able to do this as much as I originally thought I would be able to. And I realized it's a much more complicated piece of equipment, but that's a really important realization for a student, right? Yes, exactly. Susan and I got to the same place. So we can hear an emerging practitioner here, someone with enthusiasm, someone who has curiosity, someone who is engaged in the process of learning. And you're more than welcome to continue looking at Layla. But that's great. You guys are the portfolio folks. You're convinced. And we think a lot at ODU about how do we move them beyond that dreaded phrase, I learned a lot, to real metacognitive reflection. You can actually see in her portfolio the prompts her faculty member gave her, and they're pretty simple. And they are scaffolded across this work-based learning experience. But ways that we can do that, we often talk about reflection as this amorphous, ambiguous thing. We know good reflection when we see it, but how do we get there? How do we get our students beyond that? And there's a multitude of ways. But within portfolio practice, we have a few that are really key. So first, really tying reflection specifically to the artifacts students are producing. Again, in this particular higher ed environment, our students are producing constantly, and they think of it often as tied to a grade, but if they are slowed down and asked to look back at those artifacts specifically, asking rhetorical choices such as like, why have you chosen this as an example of your skills? What skills does it connect to? How do you think this prepares you for what comes next? What would you like to do more of? And you see that with Layla. She wants to work with that soundboard more, right? Also asking them revision narratives. What changed between drafts of these essays, project briefs, grant proposals, all kinds of things that students are working on. So getting into the nitty gritty of what changed, why, what was hard about it, why do they think those things matter? And I'll share with you, I've actually once recorded, so nerdy. I've been working with two colleagues on a book for a few years. And one time we accidentally hit record on our Zoom session, and we had about a 5-minute argument over 2 sentences. And I shared that with one of my writing classes so that they could see that we too sit there and bicker over things that seem irrelevant, but they all agreed that the version we came to at the end was the best one. It was also my version, so they were wise in that choice. Other reflective prompts can ask them to look at tools, right, and feedback. So I really appreciated our keynote pointing at platforms and the digital interfaces and how they impact the way we learn. So thinking about peer review, instructor, AI tools, even having students comment on how things like learning management systems impact their experiences they have plenty to say about the LMS. They don't like Canvas or Blackboard for X reasons, right? And then finally, prompts that turn them towards decision-focused language. Again, putting them back into the person who has agency and power to make choices, but asking them to provide the rationale, both for themselves and for others. Like, I chose to do this. I considered the options. So, for instance, I often tell my students when I give you feedback, you don't have to take it, but you
Right.
do need to think about why you chose not to, right? You don't have to defend it, but you need to know why you're not taking a professional editor's recommendation, right? So, having said that, I think, Elle, this is our handoff.
Yes.
Excellent. I nailed it.
Yeah, so we're going to go through just kind of some different activities about, you know, kind of how you can frame different reflections and that kind of thing. But we want to reframe the reflection towards those decision-making processes rather than kind of some of the typical prompts that you might see of, what did you learn from this assignment? What was your favorite part? How do you feel about it? Those kinds of questions, the response that's generated is just, it can be kind of generic. And those type of questions, it's also easy to get a response from AI that kind of makes sense because of how general and generic the response can be. Whereas when it's a decision focused prompt, it's a lot harder for it to make sense trying to ask someone else to answer that for you. So, we're really interested in that metacognitive process and having students think about what their own process was. Sometimes, students are doing the work and they never take that time to stop and think, how am I doing? What's working well, what's not? What choices did they make while they were completing it? What constraints shape those choices? What they would revise, why they would revise that, how they might revise it. And then again, with the feedback, what feedback did you act on? What feedback did you decide actually, no, that isn't my vision for what I'm trying to do with this assignment, with this ePortfolio. So just shifting the focus of the type of prompts that we're asking students to think about and answer. And then do we have time for a little bit of discussion, do you think, Megan? Okay, cool. So then we want you guys to think just a little bit. So how does changing the shape of these questions, how do they shape the kind of thinking students are invited to do, and which prompts spark the most curiosity about student thinking? And then share with your neighbor by, you can put it in the chat. Yeah, I will definitely say these type of questions get a lot of those, those aha moments of students kind of realizing like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing when I'm asked to do reflection. This is what I'm is being asked of me. And we've definitely seen students who are like, wow, I got so much more out of doing this type of reflection than, maybe what I've done in the past with kind of the simpler, more generic prompts. Yeah, awesome.
Elle, are you ready for me to move to the next one?
Yes.
Sorry, you're going to have to
Yeah,
let
yeah,
me
sorry,
know.
sorry.
My
I was
mind
getting
reading skills are
distracted.
offline.
Um, yeah, and the deal model it's not bad, but it's very elaborate. So sometimes it's just like it's a lot, especially when you're trying to, just get students engaging with things. But we're going to go through, just some examples of different activities you can do. Obviously, it's not exhausted, but each one can be embedded within an ePortfolio assignment to try to elicit those some less generic reflections so that it's not just summaries, and you have that evidence, decision focused, all of that. So the first one I'm going to talk about is process snapshots. So these are just, mid-semester, as they're working on things, just, snapshot, low stakes assignments, but really authentic. Um, just checking in how things are going. It can be something as simple as, think about one choice that you reconsidered, think about a challenge that you encountered, or, what is one strategy that you're using that's been really helpful. These don't have to be something really complicated, but just having students get in the habit, again, habitudes, of stopping and thinking about what it is that they're doing and why they're making the decisions that they're making. Yeah. And then having reflection checkpoints. This is where students could complete short reflections at key points in the project or course. This includes the pre-flection, reflection afterwards, in the middle. So setting goals at the beginning before they've even started, thinking about, what do you think you're going to need to do for this? What do you think might be challenging? That kind of thing. How will you, respond to that challenge? Reflecting during the work in progress stage, how's it going? Is it different than you thought it would be? What skills are you using as you work on it? And then analyzing the outcomes at the end of the project, how did it go? How do you think the end product is, what do you think of it? Was it successful? Were there things you would do differently next time? Those sort of questions. And then really a key point that we like to include is synthesizing the learning at the end of the semester. So thinking about, all the things that you've learned in that course, even better if they can, apply things that they've learned in other courses that they've had, and how has that shaped this, this course and semester and this project. But each reflection of those builds on the previous ones, and kind of really captures a lot of times how students are growing and changing their thinking over time. And then getting back to our lovely friend AI, a little bit of tool transparency. I know Megan and I are never ones to say don't use a new tool, but don't ever use a new tool uncritically. So having students talk about any tools they use, including AI, but not just AI, talk a little bit about, how it went, why they included them, when in the process they felt like they needed it, how they used it, and then, what they kept or revised or rejected from, whatever the tool suggested to them. We see a lot of students who sometimes they'll start a website with AI where it's made a lot of decisions for them. And then they end up going back and undoing so much of what you know, the AI kind of created for them. So this is a chance for them to, think about that and think about why they wanted to change those things and that sort of thing. So having that step of explaining, um, why they decided to keep something or not, and how the tools shaped that decision, if it made them think differently at all about, the assignment that they were trying to complete. And then you can also have them do a revision timeline. This is a really good activity to show their process. And this is also one that it's very hard to replicate without them having actually done the work themselves. But it really is a good indication of their process and how they do things. So something that they developed over time. So they would show their early draft, then show, some of the feedback that they received um, from their instructor, but hopefully with a little bit of peer feedback. Maybe they did show it to AI and got some suggestions, that kind of thing. So talking a little bit about the feedback they received, what feedback they decided to act on, what they didn't decide to act on, so specific changes that they made, and then showing that final version so you can see the comparison between, their early draft and their final version. And then again, that really important part where the student explains what they changed, what they kept, and why, what their decision-making process was for keeping or rejecting the feedback that they received. And then another activity that you can do is the curated multimodal evidence. So, we love our artifacts. We love a multimodal artifact, just a little bit more interesting, especially, with ePortfolios, we have the advantage, we can make it very creative, very engaging, and multimodal. But they choose some kind of representative work, one of their drafts, projects, recordings, any of that kind of thing, and explain a little bit about why they've included that piece, what it demonstrates about their learning or decisions, how it connects to the course, to the goals of the course, the objectives of what it is that they're supposed to learn through this course. Um, and really, that curation process requires students to think through, what actually is a good demonstration of their growth, how it connects to those larger goals. I'm sure we've all seen those e-portfolios where a student just puts every single piece of work that they've ever done for a course, and, it doesn't quite it's not very compelling when they do that versus when they really choose carefully what is the best representation of their work. Yeah.
Before I move on, you had a question in the chat. Curated
Oh,
multimodal evidence is an interesting word choice. Do you also explain curation to them?
I know that Megan and I always do. So yes, we suggest that you explain curation to your students. Before we even get to that part, I explain a lot about the curation and choosing and making sure that there's a really specific reason for anything that you put on your ePortfolio. If someone asks you why is that on there, you should have a really clear answer to that, not just kind of I did it in that class, so I put it on there. Um, but yes, great question.
I'm trying to type in and also pilot, but I'll say it out loud for the if there's a recording. I can't tell if there is. But like we absolutely come to curation as a rhetorical act. You are trying to persuade through the choices that you're making in your portfolio. So we ask students rhetorical questions, right? What, why, how are you selecting this? What process are you going through? What does your current archive look like? What have you included and maybe didn't save that you wish you had saved? And then, of course, thinking rhetorically, you're always thinking about audience. Who's the secondary, tertiary audience here? And what are their needs? What might they expect to see in your portfolio that they're not currently seeing? And just one quick example is I think we both do an exercise where they go look for 3 different job ads and then identify common skills or needs of that ad and then compare that to their portfolio. And this is for our capstone to see, am I, through my curative acts, addressing those needs and displaying evidence of the skills they're claiming they're looking for. So great question.
All right. And I think this might be the last one. We just wanted to give lots of different activities for you guys. But this one is artifact annotation, where, you know, each artifact, each project or draft has, a brief reflection and context setting explaining the purpose of the work, why they made the choices that they made, any feedback or tools that shaped it, and then also that step of, future plans for it, next steps for revision, that sort of thing. So always kind of that extra looking forward. As we know, ePortfolios, they're never finished. You're always updating them and changing them. So we're always trying to encourage students to think of it as a living document that can always be changing and growing with them. But linking that reflection directly to those individual artifacts helps them keep their thinking grounded in evidence, the specific decisions that they're making around, completing whatever that assignment or project is for their instructor.
Okay, it's me. Thank you, Elle. Thank you guys for your engagement in the chat. I always joke that we're just so applied that sometimes it feels like we'll just come show you what we do. How about that? And then put a light veneer of scholarship on top. So for those of you who saw our presentation last week, I apologize for a repeat, and I'm actually going to give you a different Easter egg in just a second. I've thought of my audience. I am a rhetorician. It will happen. But first, we sat here and talked about student voice. We've talked about slow pedagogies. And as I argued last week, again, not an uncritical embracer of AI, but thinking about as these tools, these writing tools emerge, which ones might actually help our students with voice and slowing down. And so last week I shared this one, and I am going to put it in the chat for a second. This comes from Stanford's D School. Thank you, Elle. And it is a reflective bot, and it does not generate reflection. Rather, it draws on, I think they said over 7 million reflective questions, and it guides a student through a deeper reflective process. So for those of you who did not do this last week, I'm going to invite you to play with Riff for just a moment. If you are willing, I always recognize people may have ethical reasons that they don't want to, or eco-critical reasons for not engaging with it. Although I will again stress that the Stanford School is really working to make sure that what they're doing is also in that do no harm philosophy. So if you'd like to play with Riff, you will either come up to the top, and we've dropped the link in the chat, to where it says Meet Riff, or come down here where it says Try the Learner Perspective, and you see the play button, and you will select that, and a little bot will pop up to talk to you. And I'm going to invite you to either reflect on something you've already learned at the conference or a teaching idea that might be rumbling around in your head. And I'm going to give you a minute to play with that. And then for those of you who were here with me last week, while they're doing that, yes, select either Try the Learner Perspective or Meet Riff up at the top left. Oh, sure. Let's do it live. I love to do things live. So if you would like, let's see, what would you like to reflect on? I'm going to use the same one I used last week just for kicks. I learned that one should always wear pants when giving a keynote, because otherwise you have to hand hold a mic. And that was a real-time lesson for your girl, because there's nowhere to put it. What specifically happened? Notice it doesn't just let me stay there. What specifically happened? Well, I walked in thinking I looked good, and Ralph Lauren, but then couldn't hook a mic to anything on my dress. I'm being silly, but you can certainly see how what was going through your mind, right? Belt lines matter. That is correct. While this isn't and I hope you guys are actually doing it on your own, but if you're not, one thing I want to highlight about this tool is notice that it has these moments of, granted, it's a bot, but sort of positive affirmation. It doesn't just move into, well, tell me more. It's like, wow, that sounds like a memorable moment. And you're like, sure is. I'm still thinking about it a week later. So clearly it resonated with me, right? And it goes, that sounds like a practical discovery. So how'd you think about it in real time? And now I've shifted into feeling and affect. I've moved out of joking with it and saying I was actually kind of embarrassed. It made me think about the interpersonal workings of what was going on because my colleague was trying to help me, right? And again, there's no judgment in the bot. It's just simply helped me surface some of the things I'm talking about, right? Right. And so I've talked a lot about Riff, but I'd like to open it up to you. Did any of you play with Riff? What are your initial thoughts on Riff there? And again, I'm not a shill for them. I know Tara said she was mad that she didn't actually hate this particular AI tool. And I felt bad about that.
No, it's okay.
Yeah. And that's okay. Technology is difficult. And I will not pause on this one, but I'm going to show you one more. I'm not saying this is a great app. It's not one I use often, but it is another one that is making its rounds in writing studies called the Hemingway app. And again, since this is a presentation on voice, while it is often packaged as like an editor, I would tell you it's definitely something more aimed at voice because it helps students see patterns in their writing and the levels at which they're writing at and how many times they're writing at those levels. Although I will say, using Hemingway as your metaphor to frame through and the voice you're emulating is certainly a choice. So I don't always advocate for this one, but I do like it when I'm trying to help a student quickly see patterns versus like, hey, in your portfolio, you're often writing at this kind of tonal register, maybe put some here, and it doesn't collect the data or feed into a large language model. The last one I want to show, just because I like to come with a bag of tricks, is one that a PhD student is currently building out of Harvard. And it's a critical thinking bot. And it asks students to pick the part of the critical thinking process that they're working through. And again, it does not do it for them. It asks them prompting questions. And the reason I want to end with that is because this student has her very own ePortfolio about her work. So it ties back, it all comes together. Woo, that was good. Thank you. I would like that applause. So having said that, we come back to the beginning because we are, again, writing studies people and we believe in circularity. So we really think that learning portfolios and the visibility of process are part of that resilience that our keynote speaker mentioned earlier, that increasingly when the AI is intersecting with writing practices and sometimes offering the really tempting possibility of taking some of this hard, messy, iterative process of composition out of your hands, that we then have the opportunity with stronger reflective prompts to reassert the student's agency and authority over their text by asking them the kinds of questions you all were referring to in the chat about decision making, process, curation, etc. And then asking the students to even engage with the fact that they have technological interfaces that may influence their choice. And I don't just mean AI. You know, you all heard me pull out Marshall McLuhan last week, the medium being the message. Anytime we pick a platform, it shapes the narrative a student can tell. And so having the student also think about the platform, and Debbie, I know you said it in the chat, but the example we gave you with Layla is a one-pager. She is limited in what she can do. She cannot embed a whole lot of things, so she must make different rhetorical choices, but she can reflect on why she's chosen that platform and made those choices. And so with that, we'll stop and turn it over to Q&A. And we always love to hear from folks. And thank you for your time. There we go. I think I left time for Q&A. Thumbs up. Great. 7 minutes. Woo, that's plethora. Did you want me to talk about habits of mind?
If you speak briefly to habitudes and the, what is it, 16 habits of mind that kind of sparked these conversations and the coining of the phrase.
Yeah, NCTE and a couple of other bodies in the writing studies groups, the kind of communities of which I'm sure many of you intersect and work within, have these, I thought it might be 8, but people add all the time, habits of mind, things like curiosity, iteration, etc. And really talking about habitudes as these practices and ways of thinking that require repetition, right? Which will go back to something many of us are saying about reflection. Part of that is your neural pathways develop only when something is given time and repetition. Otherwise, they don't become a habit. They're just something you do in a one-off. And so when we talk about habitudes, they are these habits of mind that people who have practiced over time and gotten feedback on them can draw on for life, right? And so really that's kind of how I perceive the understanding of habitude. Yeah, I was right. 8. It's tough because you're like, I think there's now, they added some high impact practice criteria. Yeah, I'm like, my mind has only so much space, guys. Like when I learn a framework, I need you to keep it there, but that's okay. That's all right. But yeah. My mentor, Shelley Rodrigo, will be like, that was the sloppiest description of habits of mind, but it's really important and it's tied again to writing studies. So, oh, we are fantastic, as they should. Yeah. Yeah.
I can't even formulate a question. There's so many ideas between the different presentations this morning. I'm like going all the way back to the keynote, thinking about Bucknell tools, going back to Bucknell's tools from the night before, connecting conversations that you provided even more context for today from your keynote last week. A little bit of overload here, which is fabulous. I love it.
Well, we thank you all for your time and we'll show up again later today. So if you think of questions between now and then, we'll try to hold this in our mind.